Welcome back to Sika Strength. Welcome back to Sika Stan. Today we're talking about how to structure your training when trying to run fast and lift heavy on the same day or in the same session. We'll go over the structure of the training sessions, how you should structure your week, and the inherent issues that come along with this multimodal training. Over the last 4 years, I've been training towards running a sub 5-minute mile and squatting 500 pounds in the same day. This has undoubtedly been the toughest thing I've ever trained for, and it still evades me to this day, despite 3 massive training blocks. At the peak of these training blocks, I was doing 14 or so sessions per week, 3 gym sessions and 11 running sessions. This meant multiple times per week I'm doing 2-a-days or stacking both my run work and lifting work into the same session. For all of you high rocks and CrossFit athletes out there, this really doesn't seem to be so crazy. You commonly do cardio and lifting almost always in the same day, but certainly in the same session isn't crazy either. But it's absolutely paramount to understand the interference effect is a very real thing, and you are almost certainly holding yourself back by stacking both of these things together in a very particular way. The interference effect refers to the phenomenon of lowering gains in strength, hypertrophy, and cardiovascular endurance when strength and cardio work are done concurrently. Essentially, if you're sending 2 signals at once, the body aggregates the adaptation. Also, the concurrent training means the adaptation energy needed to recover from the sessions is essentially halved, and because of this, we must lower our training volume of each component part. There are 4 key things to consider when we look at training both cardio endurance and strength training at the same time. The first of these is the weekly structure of the training sessions. In most academic studies looking at the interference effect and how we can limit the effects of it, the main thing we see is the time interval between cardiovascular stimulus and strength training stimulus being absolutely vital. So, if I'm doing a strength training session in the evening, I want about 6 to 8 hours either before or afterwards between cardio and strength training. This can be quite simple to achieve in terms of the individual day itself. Maybe I run in the morning and I lift weights in the evening. But when we start looking at the overall weekly structure, we start seeing some difficulties popping their heads up. The first issue that arises is depending on the magnitude of the goal, you might need to hit quite a few training sessions per week. It's very unlikely you're going to hit all-time maximal numbers if you're only lifting or running once or twice per week. So with that understanding, we must now divvy up our training sessions over the course of the 7 days. Let's say, for example, we're going to run twice and lift twice per week. For many of you listening, you're probably doing more training than this at the moment, but let's start off at this level. In this case, the ideal scenario would be to run on the Monday, lift on the Tuesday, take a break on the Wednesday, and then run Thursday, lift Friday again. Why am I suggesting this? Well, the number one thing we need is a full rest day in between our harder training sessions. One of the most common mistakes we see athletes making is dividing their training up into so many different component parts that they never have 1 or 2 full days of rest per week. Now, both experiential data and academic data will back us up on this. Even for the peak genetic freaks out there who are full-time professional athletes, at minimum 1 full day of rest per week without any of these recovery workouts or lighter training sessions in there has been found to be massively beneficial, both in terms of endurance adaptation and strength training adaptation. So if you are in that rare case where you have more than 7 sessions per week and you must divide up those across 6 days because we know we need at least 1 full day of rest, then we come on to our second issue, and that is the structuring of the training sessions themselves. When we start lifting weights, usually we'll get a program, and that program will hopefully have the most complicated, the most high speed and high power output pieces first. If you're doing some power cleans or snatches, they'll almost certainly be at the start of the training session. If you're doing some bodybuilding or hypertrophy work, hopefully they're at the end of the training session. Now, this is to ensure a number of things. Firstly, when we are fully psychologically primed and we are neurologically ready to drive as many neurotransmitters as possible down our spinal cord, we should be doing the high-speed explosive movements. This has been proven time and time again and probably exists within almost every training session you've run. This is why we don't want weightlifters squatting before they do snatch or clean and jerk, and we don't want powerlifters maxing out their deadlift before they have to do some technique work on the bench or technique work on the squat. Think about when you're fresh, you do the hardest psychological and physiological things, or as the barbell's moving fastest, we must be at our most fresh. Moving down through the training session then, we should essentially move from that top end of speed to the lowest end of speed. What does this mean for you as a hybrid athlete? Well, if you're doing sprint training, plyometric training, or agility work, this should be structured towards the start of your training session or hopefully when you're most fresh within the week. So if we poke back to component 1 for a second, our structuring of our week, I don't want to be doing my most explosive high-speed sessions on a Friday or Saturday when I'll be quite fatigued from my week of training. I should be trying to stack those when I know I will be most fresh. Now, if you're in academia or you're still in school, this will probably look like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of the week. If you're somebody who works shift, obviously it's going to look quite different. Looking then to the actual structure of the training session itself again, for many of us, when we're doing a hybrid style of training, we're going to be doing a lot of mileage of quite low speed cardiovascular endurance work. This might be on a rowing erg, this might be on track running where I'm just hitting 4-minute kilometers or 5-minute kilometers, just building up that mileage over the course of the week. In any of these cases where I'm looking for that low impact, higher volume cardiovascular work, I'm going to be putting that at the end of the training session itself. Now, what I can also do, if my time has been restricted, I might only have an hour and 30 minutes to train, then I will put some of that cardio endurance work in as my warm-up. If I know I want to hit a total of 40 minutes per session of work on a stationary bike, then I can certainly put 20 minutes of that cardio work on the bike in as a warm-up for my strength training. Then I'll do my strength training piece and I can achieve the rest of that cardiovascular volume later on in the session. The third component here is recovery capital. So allowing your body to fully recover. This is a combination of physiological recovery coming in the form of proper fueling, proper hydration, good rest and proper sleep, but also psychological recovery in terms of not getting fully hyped up for every session. If you're somebody who knows they need to go to the well or go to the red line to hit their certain goals in training, it is very important we don't fully max out, be it on strength training or cardio endurance training, every single time we go to train. We should be able to turn up that intensity the same way we will turn up the volume on a radio. If I know one track session in particular where I'm doing 200 repeats is very difficult, I hold on to a lot of that psychological drive and energy for that session. And then when I'm going into my standard strength training sessions or my longer mileage work, I won't take the same amount of stimulus, I won't get myself quite as hyped, and I won't even listen to music that is as stimulating for me. If I like to listen to very heavy metal music just before I max my squat, I will lessen the effect if I listen to that prior to every squat session. A number of years ago, you might have seen Owen doing an excellent video explaining recovery capital. He used timber blocks stacked on a counter in front of him to help people understand how they're dividing that recovery capital across multiple aspects of their training. In that case, he's talking about weightlifting, where we have a lot of recovery capital going towards the snatch and the clean and jerk. Then we have some recovery capital going towards our strength training, like our front squats, our back squats, and our pulls. And then we have some recovery capital going towards our accessories. In your case, as a hybrid athlete, you're mainly thinking about dividing between 3 different silos. The first silo is our strength training piece. Whether this is a back squat, a deadlift, or a bench press, whatever you're doing, that will require a certain amount of capital, a certain amount of calories to recover from. We then add in our cardiovascular endurance work or our running work, whether it's 3Ks, 5Ks, or a mile, whatever it is, you have to put some of your recovery capital, some of those calories you're eating, into that second pile. The final pile then that's often forgotten about is our accessory work, our prehab work, or our rehab work. If I'm somebody who struggles with my stride as I'm running, or maybe I struggle with my knees caving in the squat, I will need some corrective exercise to be added to my program, and that corrective exercise needs its own specific amount of recovery capital. This is commonly where people feel like the interference effect has its biggest influence. Now, it is undeniable that this has a massive influence over the overall training load. It's undeniable. It is why the absolute ceiling for strength or absolute ceiling for running capabilities is reduced in hybrid athletes, but it's not the total picture. This brings us on nicely to number 4. The nefarious effects of pressing too many buttons on the remote control. Think about yourself as a TV for a second. As you're doing bicep curls, you're pressing that bigger biceps button. You're essentially doing something to those muscles, something to that neurological tissue to force your body to create an adaptation there. If I'm squatting, it's quite easy to see what happens. I get better myelination of the nerves, I get more neurotransmitters coming down my nervous system, I get an increase in cross-sectional muscle area, so my quads, my ass, my back, everything is getting bigger, and the squat is the stimulus I'm using to get there. My body is trying to do something, it's not able to do it as well as it would like, so it makes a change. What happens now when we have somewhat conflicting or divergent training goals is that I will introduce a stimulus. So let's say the big bicep button gets pressed on the TV, and now I'll suddenly press another button like better cardio endurance. When we're looking for cardio endurance, when we're looking to get better at running or faster at running, some of our stimulus will incite a similar adaptation as strength training. We will get an increase in red blood cell count, we will get increased vascularity around certain muscles, both of which will help with running outcomes and lifting outcomes. But there are a number of divergent adaptation pathways. So thinking back again to the remote anecdote, I'm trying to push the volume up and volume down button at the same time. I'm trying to pick channel 1 and channel 5 at the same time. Now, this has been proved in multiple academic studies. The veracity of those studies has been called into question somewhat, but it is absolutely undeniable that when we get away from super specific training and go to multimodal training, the absolute ceiling for those weights or times or speeds decrease. So with these 4 allowances now, we understand we need to be good at structuring our training week, ensuring we have at least 1 full day of rest per week, combined with an appropriate and intelligent structure of training where my very high intensity or very high load sessions get their own priority, and where my lower load, maybe slower speed sessions get slightly less priority. So they can be stacked after the very important sessions. Number 2, we understand the actual structure of the training session themselves. Those high speed exercises come first when we're very fresh. The hypertrophy stuff comes afterwards when we don't need to be quite so fresh. Number 3 is that we understand there is only a certain amount of recovery capital we have. And number 4 is understanding that the absolute ceiling of our potential has been somewhat lowered. The final thing I'd love you to think about now as you're structuring those running and squatting or rowing and deadlifting goals together is the idea that I can get much better at both of these if I give them their own prioritized block. So let's just go back to the start for a quick second. I talked about squatting 500 pounds, trying to run sub 5 minutes in the mile. In this case, I think it is almost impossible to do this challenge if you have not achieved both of these values individually before. In my case, I'd squatted 500 pounds a number of times before, and I had spent years of my life being able to run sub 5-minute miles for a long time. In which case, I was very happy to go into a concurrent training period where I was pushing both at the same time. This worked exceptionally well for the squat. Every single time I was able to squat in excess of 500 pounds with just 2 squat sessions per week. But it did not work as well for the running, and in my opinion, one of the main reasons for that is that it had been far longer since I was in 5-minute mile shape versus just a few years since I was in 500 pound squat shape. So in these cases, if you're looking at these two goals that mightn't be quite concurrent, that might be in some way at odds with each other, you should be saying, am I in good shape for both of these? And have I been in good shape for both of these in the somewhat recent past? Maybe last year you hit the deadlift you wanted, and earlier this year you hit the row you wanted. That is absolutely perfect. But in my opinion, if you're going to chase something like this, one of these hybrid style goals, you should be doing an independent block for each of your individual component parts, being able to hit those confidently when you're just training for one thing, and then transitioning into the hybrid style of training afterwards. I hope this helps. If you have any comments, please let them down below. As always, if you'd like to take a look at maybe the RTA squat program or the RTA 2.0, both of which work great for driving those squat 1RM numbers up, please take a look at the link. This brings you to the Sika Strength app available on Apple and Android. You can start off with a 7-day free trial, and it allows you to run 2 programs at the same time. So maybe you want to do the track running program in combination with the RTA 2.0, or maybe you want to run the upper body armor hypertrophy program to gain some size and strength in your upper body. Thanks very much for watching.